Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Caster Calls with ZombieGrub, episode 52, actually, but this might be a familiar face. This is the first time that I'm doing a part two, and it is with none other than DJWheat. So thank you very much for coming on once again. We had a great talk about your life in esports, you know, the decades of it, I suppose, as well as some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, and I just was very eager to hear more, especially about the StarCraft era, very selfishly, but there it is. So thank you very much for coming on, and I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to be back. So thanks for having me again.
Yeah. So, you know, we talked kind of a little bit about some of the early days, but you mentioned that you just had like a lot more to talk about as far as how StarCraft grew and developed. So we're really just going to focus on the years that you were in StarCraft. I figured that'd be a nice like time frame, basically, just from the year.
Sure.
Well, actually, because I guess, did you ever do any Brood War? I forget.
I dabbled. I mostly ended up doing Brood War because right, there just weren't as many casters back then, and I think we talked a little bit about how sort of got tasteless to kind of join radio ITG inside the game. And during the time there were a few events where tasteless was kind of casting out of his mind and like just doing it by himself. And so after a while it was like, hey, Nick, I don't know. I know just enough to ask, I think, good questions to make you seem like the smartest StarCraft player. Like, can I at least be your wingman? And of course he was like, yes, absolutely. And that's how I approached it. Right. I was like, I don't know much about strategy. I know pretty much what units are, right? Basic gameplay mechanics, but I would sort of use the opportunity of sitting next to Nick as a way to learn how to cast it myself. So, why would a player do that? Or why did he choose not to rush there? Or why did he decide not to go through it? Right. And for me, that was a really great experience. So hopefully that answers it. I would say sort of, kind of, but never as like a lead, right? Usually as an assist.
Right. Yeah. So that was, I mean, we're talking like 2007.
Yeah, I want to say that let's see, 2006. I know that we casted together in Monza, Italy for the World Cyber Games, and I want to say I recall casting with him in 2008 in, or maybe that was 7 in Seattle. So it was definitely during World Cyber Games that I did most of my Brood War casting with Nick. So don't go look for those archives, please, for the love of God. But yeah, it was in that early area, like really as live streaming was just kind of hitting the scene.
Okay. Yeah. So a little bit prior to StarCraft 2 and the birth of Justin TV and Twitch.tv. And then into, I guess, like your years doing all the MLGs and IEMs and all that before you, I guess, prioritize more in the work on Twitch. I kind of forget exactly how it came to be. But I'm sure we'll get into it maybe chronologically. Keep it simple.
Sure.
So Brood War, you were dabbling a little bit. You were doing a ton of other games as well, and then StarCraft 2 was on the horizon. What was that a couple of first events like? Because I know one of the most infamous events that I didn't go to, despite living near it, was Washington D.C. One of the first MLGs, and people made fun of it because it didn't have chairs, was the thing that I know about it.
Yes, it's true. They had those really uncomfortable metal benches. They looked bad on camera. They were uncomfortable to sit on. And really it was because StarCraft 2 at MLG at the time was kind of being tested per se, right? I think MLG, they had their PC circuit, they'd done a little bit with World of Warcraft, and then StarCraft 2 hit. They clearly saw the popularity of the game and its potential, and so it was the side stage, which on one hand was kind of like, what the hell, like StarCraft 2 is getting the side stage. But on the other hand, I think everyone was just genuinely excited that it was getting a chance. Now, I do have to back up just a little bit because my interest in StarCraft 2 actually came from BlizzCon, in which, you know, I did cast with Artosis and Tasteless, and I cast with Bunny, Kim Fawn, and Warcraft 3, and go back and forth. But at the BlizzCon where they announced StarCraft 2, I got to sort of be that person that I mentioned earlier that I was to Nick, where Dustin and Rob, they did a exhibition match in StarCraft 2. And I just remember being not only so amazed that this game that I had seen over the years was this new beautiful engine, and here's these new units and these stalkers that can blink, and oh my God, it's going to change everything. And so that was really where I think my relationship with StarCraft like evolved to go, oh my gosh, this is going to be my next favorite game. Like everything about it was just speaking to me. And so it kind of started there, and then, and then of course went into the MLG era.
Right. Okay. No, that's great to start, you know, where it actually started. But you brought up something, and I remember a question I'd love to ask people. Did you ever experience any of the Brood War elitism? Like, how much did you talk to the people who were really into Brood War, or maybe even some Warcraft people who also hated StarCraft 2? I don't know. And did that ever become like a serious conversation between you and some of the other guys? Did you get affected mentally about the opinion of StarCraft 2?
No, not at all. In fact, I was probably one of the advocates on the side of, you know, hey, Brood War was always going to be Brood War, and always going to be amazing, and always going to have like strong memories and feelings that it invokes for a lot of people. But imagine a world where a new version comes out, right? And in a time which arguably a lot of people are looking at Brood War graphics and being like, what are you playing here, right? But this is the same thing that I dealt with in like Quake and Counter-Strike 1.6. So that didn't bother me that much. But to me, it was exciting to think about a new era where the accessibility for a game that so many people have loved, and probably so many more people would fall in love with, would, you know, it would be expanded. It would be a new horizon. Now, the one time I do feel like I experienced a little bit of Brood War elitism, which is also okay. Like I respected it, but I remember at one of the events that I spoke to earlier, I think WCG Seattle, and I recall casting alongside Nick, and I think at the time Team Liquid started coming up a little bit. And so that was probably when I made my Team Liquid account and like learned a little bit about that community. And, you know, frankly, on one hand, I was actually so impressed with the site and the way that the community, how involved they were. You know, at this point, I'm getting like the full tour from Tasteless. She's like, yeah, look I can watch some like VODs from yesterday that just got posted, and these are like impossible to find. Like, you got to be on the in, and like people posting blogs. But I generally felt like, wow, this is a really healthy community. And the one thing that is true across the board is that so many of these folks are passionate. Now, as you can imagine, got a little bit of like, who's this idiot casting with Tasteless? And like, of course we know what this stuff does. Why does he asking questions? Thankfully, a few of the Brood War elite also are like, hey, listen, don't sit here and bitch about the scene not growing and then not accept someone coming in and wanting to broaden that scene. Like, this person probably has some fans, like maybe Quake players get interested. And I was like, you know what? You're the real champs. Like, that was that, because we still see this happening in gaming today. And the fact that someone was able to stop down, to me, it just showed a lot of the, some people might be like, Wheat, are we talking about the same Team Liquid? But I think that there's a lot of positive discord that took place on Team Liquid for many, many years. Like, yes, of course, you have your like trolling and rivalries and this and that and bickering and whatnot. But I always felt like there was a level of respect that everyone kind of gave to one another, just kind of because you were there and you were participating. So that was the only time I think I ever kind of experienced that. But at the same time, the same amount of people who are like, no, this is good, right? It's telling us that more people are taking an interest in the game and the community.
Yeah, that is good. I feel like I saw a decent amount of that as well in my early days. I was actually too afraid to join Team Liquid around 2011. I think I only joined around 2012, even though I was reading the forums and stuff.
Official lurker.
Yeah. I was legitimately intimidated because it seemed like everyone knew so much, and then everyone was really quite harsh when it came to stepping out of bounds.
Right.
As far as like the internet courtesy. Anyways, it just was a little intimidating. So yeah, I very much kept to myself for Team Liquid. Anyways, I did see the same thing. People would just bash on anything related to StarCraft 2, and then be Brood War fans, obviously, and then the Brood War fans would come over and be like, this is really pointless. So that was really nice.
Yeah.
To see the defenders and the acknowledgers of, it's time to move on type of situation.
Right.
But one of my favorite things to bring up is that I was doing research for one of my StarCraft history videos, and just coincidentally, I was deep into like a page 57 of, Brood War fans talking about StarCraft 2. And there's Tasteless saying that multi-building selection is going to be a detriment. It's not going to work out in StarCraft. And I was like, a piece of history.
That's awesome, actually.
Yeah. That was very fun. And obviously they did a great job kind of embracing StarCraft 2 as well. Because we do know especially at this point, them getting back into Brood War, that is their first love, and that's, no shade or anything like that.
Yeah.
But they... So go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, like, one of the awesome things about it is, like, yes, of course people are going to have those, conversations, and it's almost going to be doom and gloom, right? You're taking something that's beloved. It's like, they're bound to screw it up somehow. But the other part that I think no one could have predicted was sort of what it was going to mean for the scene, right? It was going to mean that this legacy that had been built for years, almost 12 years at the point of release, that suddenly that was going to come into play and add a layer to this game that a lot of games will never, ever see because they won't have a successful sequel like StarCraft 2. So, the building of the storylines of, like, here's the North American players, and then now Canada's in it, and then all the Euros are playing. Oh, shit. Like, the Koreans are coming on the scene. And like the unfolding of that in and of itself almost made, I think, a lot of people go, you know what? Who cares about this stuff? Like, what's happening is pretty cool. And this is awesome because these are players that I grew up with or that I know. And here's a new player. Can they do anything? And I don't think that anyone was in a space. And I don't know, you read this thread, so maybe someone was like, hey, think about it this way. But I think everyone was so focused on the gameplay, right? Losing a piece of the game that they loved, that they weren't actually thinking about what this meant for the legacy of StarCraft overall, especially from a competitive perspective.
Yeah, I don't think anyone was, because this is really a new conversation, right? Like, it is awesome being a part of the StarCraft community because it really did have so many moments in esports history.
Yeah.
It really was tied directly to esports history for so long. But that includes Brood War too, which obviously at the time, nothing was close to it. It was a country's esport.
Right.
Undeniable. It's very different. But what's interesting, the point I was going to bring up about Tasteless is that what's really nice about them is that they did their best to basically embrace it. All right. Like all the, trolling in chat and subreddits and whatnot about them not having any passion, whatever. They embraced StarCraft 2 on camera. They were happy when 6 Marines split 2 directions, and they were like, whoa, man. Whoa. And this was 2010. And I actually really respect them for that, because as much as I am not a Brood War elitist, I do like Brood War, but I like StarCraft 2 better. But when you compare 2010's Brood War to 2010's StarCraft 2, they are massively different. We are talking about a perfected game versus a babby game. Did you ever have those conversations or those moments, because you did cast a little bit of Brood War, where you were like, StarCraft 2 isn't there yet, like we haven't even seen what we're going to see in a year or 2 or 3 years.
I mean, in some regards, it was a forced function because of the way that Blizzard chose to release StarCraft. So you knew that no matter what was happening in Wings of Liberty, like that was inevitably going to change because there were 2 additional, versions that were coming out. So I do think that a lot of conversation took place in terms of, all of these little things that were discovered, the way to get carriers out faster, and like the way that you group with your mutalists with an overlord, like all these things that were discovered, right, somewhat as a nuance of the game itself. But then that also meant like strategy and styles of play, and even the way that map metas evolved and changed. So yeah, I think there was inevitably this feeling of, this is just the beginning. And honestly, if StarCraft 2 delivers on any of that evolution that Brood War did, that's gonna be a good thing, right? So I think in some ways, a lot of the evolution early on just came from a player style perspective, right? When North America was pretty much just fighting against North America, that was one thing. But then lingering in the shadows, everyone knew, well, it's going to be really interesting when like the rest of the world gets in on that. So there was that natural player evolution. What are those styles going to be? Obviously, a lot of arguments over what race is the most OP, and and all the things in between, like why is Steps of War even in the map pool? This is ridiculous. And that's of course like every esport, whether you're Brood War or StarCraft 2 coming off of Brood War, Counter-Strike, like you need time to get those good maps out, and for players to develop strategies, and for theory crafting to happen. So yeah, I was very long-winded in that answer, Jess. I apologize. But I think the point being is that everyone, I think, knew kind of when that first set of competition started, even back in beta, that there was something special here. And it didn't matter what someone thought between Brood War or StarCraft 2, that, right, like this is the status quo, and this is pretty great for StarCraft in general.
Yeah, it felt like every cast, there was something amazing that was happening that now we look back on. I've watched some 2010 VODs, and it's laughable that someone got excited about it, right? But it's so fun to go back and watch them, but it is even funnier to listen to the commentary, right? The first time that someone made faster mutas like Fruit Dealer to combat the high ground tank on that one terrible map, minds were blown.
Right.
The first time Baneling was used against Thor's, Artosis' mind was blown. So it's funny listening to all those things. We had kind of the reverse Brood War muta trick where people eventually figured out magic boxing, which was awesome. Right. It is so much, and there's still we're still finding the bugs too. We're getting into that stage of our lifetime in StarCraft 2 where we're finding the really small bugs, Yeah. But go ahead.
I gotta say before we move on, there's something so great about the innocence that you just talked about, right? Like that there was a time in which, in my experience, like MMA blows up his own command set. Like it just doesn't happen anymore. I don't know why that happened. I don't know what these things, like mistakes are certainly made, but there was a certain innocence and I think overall excitement during that period, because everything that was happening was, it was new. It was fresh. It was a redefining of the scene. And even today, right, I would say that there's some freshness in like new players that kind of, are working their way up and represent the new blood in StarCraft 2. But, that's a hard era to recapture. Right. And so I think for me personally, it does resonate as like an exciting era, just because a lot of what was happening was new. A lot of it was already in the game. It was just people hadn't used it yet. Like how long was hallucination in the game before Huck decided, let's see if this works, right? And we're like, mind games, unbelievable. Yeah. But right, the innocence there is great, because I don't think that sort of thing happens anymore, but it can only happen at like that unique period of a game's life.
Yeah. The expansions also gave the same feeling too, actually. And there's something really fun about feeling like you're on level with some of the pros, because they also don't know what's happening. Like if you were the first one to figure out that Zerg was super imbalanced, you could actually abuse that, right? Which it was in the beginning of Legacy of the Void. Anyways, staying at the beginning of StarCraft 2 in general, though. So, I could ask you a lot of questions about like, did you ever contact them about the balance or, about the gameplay, but what I'm really interested in from your perspective is the broadcasting quality that increased, right? So we kind of came in with Twitch, the idea that esports could be widely broadcast to the internet as well as the people in the venue. And what we first came with broadcasting wise, replay wise, was a beautiful default overlay that had no space.
Yeah.
Did you have a lot of conversations around that, coming in as kind of like the broadcaster of the group, not just the StarCraft nerd of the group?
There definitely were a lot of conversations about access to information, right? And that, like, from a spectator perspective, there is a lot of information that is not visible or needs to be. From a broadcaster or caster perspective, there's a lot of information that they want. And I think this did sort of naturally happen. You know, there's always, again, this sort of exploration period of like, where's the best place to put the scoreboard? Where's the best place? Like, should we try to use the in-game supply numbers, or should we put that up? Because we have to remember too, my first StarCraft 2 game that I ever broadcast over the internet was 4x3. It looked like you were watching it on a 19-inch tube television. You couldn't read anything. You got a pretty good idea of like, I know what unit that is. I know what unit that is. I know who's red. I know who's blue. Let's go. But right, even back then, we had such a massive technology shift between 2009 and 2011, when suddenly went from 4x3 to 16:9 and the bit rates went up, etc. So a lot of my focus was actually on like the technical back end of like, how can we push the quality, because there was so much information that needed to be seen. And if you couldn't read that information, it was harder to enjoy the game. Thankfully, on like the Blizzard side with like the spectator UI, you know, it wasn't just casters who were getting in on that conversation. Reddit was getting in on it. Team Liquid was getting in on it. And I think that that was really a solid collective effort. I think the tournament organizers were, you know, wanted a better solution. Obviously, all the spectators did. So I don't know, you know, where that credit actually lies, but I feel like it was something everyone talked about, right? And what better audience than to listen to than the spectators, the players, the tournament organizers, the broadcasters, to say, like, it's just everyone that wants to take your game and share it to the world, right? And make them happy, and it's going to be a good path. So, I did not talk to them ever about balance. I like to be the conductor of those conversations, but never quite felt right like I was qualified from a game understanding perspective. I was happy to give my opinion at any time, but I think I represented at the time like a casual player from a skill level, but like super passionate and just wanted to play more. So
yeah, I think I'm going to get back to that a little bit. But I wanted to stay on the like talking with developers section. When did Blizzard start to talk with you guys? Because when I came in, they started to have summits about every year, and that was around 2014. I remember the first one I was invited to, anyways. Was that happening before, or were they just chatting you up on whatever AIM back
maybe
then?
Not, yeah, maybe not official summits per se. There were definitely times when I think at really early on, it was players, and that was probably the right decision, right? I think still, if you imagine during the development of StarCraft 2, live streaming hadn't quite like broken through the barrier yet. So it was there. It's an emerging technology, but I actually do not think that Blizzard was thinking, our numbers too small to be seen on 4x3 at 500 kilobits a second, and understandably so, right? I don't hold them. I don't hold anything against them for not identifying that, but I do think that it was something they quickly got. So I think that when the major tournaments started to get 10-20,000 people, as like the Twitch viewership started to increase, that's probably the moment in which those conversations became less surface and much deeper.
Okay. And when, we started talking to Blizzard, what were those conversations like? Did you guys actually have discussions around like the casting crew, the tournament organizers, or was it more just like a, hey, we're trying out this new thing, okay, see you later?
Yeah, I think for me personally, it was a little bit more either I was talking with alongside tournament organizers or in a one-on-one capacity.
Mm.
I wasn't as involved, I think, and as things went on, yes, I think more players, more commentators, etc., got involved, more feedback was gathered, but I felt like, going into some of the latter years in 2011, like, we let things like inside the game speak for, right, the kind of our feeling on how things were, whether that was a spectator, that was a gameplay mechanic, or a balance change or whatever. And every once in a while, yeah, we would get a correspondence that would reference something. So we felt like pretty confident that Blizzard was watching this. It wasn't like they were like, oh, people passionate about our game, cool. They respected kind of the conversation that was happening around it. Again, something pretty new for a development team to be able to tap into. Sure, they get all this data from like the back end on how people are playing, how races are doing, unit usage, etc., and then cross all different leagues. But this is the first time that there was like more human, a higher frequency of more human feedback, right? Don't forget too that a lot of the inbound feedback for like 2 years to Blizzard was not super productive. It was basically like, add land. It's all we want. Just add land. It's nothing else matter, and I think looking back on that, many people will tell you, yeah, that was probably not the best use of time, but I think also just went to show people cared about the integrity of the competitions. We had a few infamous MLGs that went on for hours and hours and hours without the ability to play the game. That didn't make sense to a lot of people. So yeah, that was kind of the full range of kind of communication and discussion with Blizzard.
Okay. And to bring it back a little bit to the commentary, this is maybe 50-50 commentary question and Blizzard interaction question. You say like you didn't really find it that necessary to step in and talk about balance, which I would agree with. I wouldn't really be the one to ask about balance, and they didn't recently, so they're still good on that part. They asked the players, and we talk about this a lot, I think, in all esports, but the idea of balance versus like entertainment, right? So the cliche from StarCraft is that Immortal Centurion versus Brutal Infestor was 50-50. So it's balanced, right? But it's freaking terrible to watch. Right. So when, it's a very important time in our lifespan here. Brutal Infestor, tail end of Wings of Liberty, that was hard. It's hard to watch. How hard was it to commentate? Did you feel the effects of it? Did you feel the community starting to push back on it?
I definitely, but I think that was a byproduct of like everyone knew Heart of the Swarm was going to come out, and that, then we've got Legacy of the Void beyond that. It's like, just hold on a little bit longer. They're not going to make sweeping changes before, right, the new game comes out. So on some level, there were probably like the 5 stages of dealing with that, right? The like denial, the anger, the grief, the acceptance, and then finally the release, because the game released and everyone's like, okay, now we've got something new that's totally not balanced that we can talk about and have discussion around. I do think that in the latter portion of Wings of Liberty, that was probably the toughest period overall for like viewers, players, right? The new game was coming out. You look at it now versus then, a lot more in the game. It expands the way that players can play, etc. Also, no one knew what to expect between expansions, so that was kind of an unknown area. No one really wanted to try to guess what was going to happen in that situation. I think from casting, I should probably be fully transparent. Like I am and have always been a Zerg lover, so I may even have been called out for bias in the past as far as that's concerned. But I will admit that as a Zerg player, like, yeah, it's like, okay. But you know what was so funny about that time? is you spoke a little bit about the times that we got excited about things. Is that I think that sometimes us casters would get genuinely hyped up when we thought, oh, this might be it. This might be the way to break this and make, like completely redefine the meta. And very rarely it happens. So it was more or less like a building up anticipation for something that ultimately ended up in the same results. But I think you're right on in terms of identifying that as one of the sort of tougher periods of maybe not tougher. I guess the right word to use would be stale, right? Like things felt a little stale for a little bit.
They did. Yes, there was a lot of complaints. I mean, I still get people coming in and be like, yeah, I quit because I was Terran and it was too, brutal. I'm back here 8 years later. And I was like, all right. All right, then. But it was a drag for a lot of people. Now, I do sometimes wonder, and you're a perfect person to ask about this, if it wasn't just Brutal Infestor, right? Not that StarCraft 2 was getting old at that point, because that's literally a year and a half into its lifespan, but rather that we had a couple of other games starting to pop up, like League of Legends. So this gets around kind of the infamous state of the game, or was it inside the game? Destiny in control argument?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, inside the game, yeah.
Yeah, so we were getting around kind of that period, but there were other games that were starting to show a new path to esports and gaming future, if you will. So were you ever... what was your perspective around that era when League of Legends was starting to be kind of talked about more often, free to play games and skin customization? Because I feel like there was a gradual movement to that just being like, yeah, it's just video games now. But I remember back then that was still, it came in the box. That's your game. What are you talking about? So what was your perspective on this?
Gosh. I hope we have enough time here, because this is like a really interesting thing. Like, StarCraft 2 suffers a little bit from being ahead of its time, right? In the era that it got released. Now, on one hand, here it was building off of a 12-year legacy. Brood War's amazing. Everyone's still playing it. The Korean pro gaming scene completely blows up. Boom, here's the sequel. It sparks esports again. It comes at the dawn of live streaming. But clearly, Blizzard didn't have all of the data that was going to help them make really informed decision for the next few years. Like, for example, if free to play had hit the scene a little bit earlier, there's a part of me that feels like, Blizzard probably would have ended up going that way. And you look at Hearthstone and look at Heroes of the Storm and look at the upcoming Diablo Immortal, right? Clear indicators that Blizzard's like, yeah, it's a pretty good model, right? And so I think on one hand, Blizzard kind of found themselves stuck, right? And here's why that was terrible, because you had a ridiculous amount of passionate individuals that were ready to show their passion, not only in the hours that they were putting into the game, but by opening their wallets, right? I used to always say, it was like one of my go-to arguments on Inside the Game, I would pay an unlimited amount of money to have capes to put on my banelings, right? Like, it just would be adorable and I would love it and it'd be great. And so as you see League of Legends popularity, not necessarily because it was, right, the reasons were a combination of it being a MOBA, that being new, it having a pretty, nice little graphical style that is improving off of Dota and Warcraft 3, and then yes, skins and all these different things. And I don't have to pay anything if I want to try this game out, right? So I do think that, unfortunately, Blizzard probably was at a point with the game where it's like, if we pivot, we will bury our own game. So I think that they had to do what was going to be best for the longevity of the game. And unfortunately, that meant going forward with their original plan, not making it free to play, not adding in some of these other aspects that I think could have kept people interested and whatnot. And of course, this was all then compounded by the confusion behind, well, why don't you have LAN, right? You've kind of got the foundation to make this exactly like other popular free-to-play games that are growing in popularity, and but you're not quite there. I don't blame Blizzard for that, right? I think that had StarCraft 2 released a year later, it might have been a totally different scenario and outcome overall. So the way that I felt about it was, you know, understandably, I came from Quake originally. It was sort of the game that got me into esports. And I still watch Quake 1 matches today. Are they for hundreds of thousands of dollars? No. Do 500 people still tune in because they love this game and they love the players? Yes. And to me, a game is not truly dead until no one plays it anymore, right? So I was coming from a place where it's like Quake 3 got released around the same time as Brood War, and people are still playing tournaments for it, just like people are still playing Brood War in tournaments and whatnot. So for me, I guess I automatically had this default feeling of, even though I don't think this is the best way forward for StarCraft 2, it's clearly going to have a very long life because of the passionate community that exists around it. Maybe it lost an opportunity to grow a bit, and I think that's probably the downfall in all of that. Whereas like other games, I think kept growing. We saw the audience numbers kind of hit a ceiling. Player numbers were definitely not as high as they were. They increased on expansions and whatnot, but I who do you yell at for that, right? For Blizzard releasing a game as a industry was sort of shifting in that regard.
Yeah.
So I didn't particularly like to get on the fuck you Blizzard train. I thought that was not that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And that was pretty much my opinion and how I shared it overall. Yeah.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think that I've said similar things, actually. If it was released a year or two later or started development, in 2010 instead of 2006, whenever it was, we're talking about a very different game.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe they would have still been the old Blizzard magic, and they would have figured out a way to put all these things into an RTS, which sounds like it's still a very complicated ordeal for the people who have moved on to Frost Giant, and they want to do what Blizzard missed out on. They think there is that opportunity now that they can fix the things that went wrong in the past. It's like Quantum Leap, but for StarCraft.
There's one other perspective that, hindsight is 20/20, as they say, but in a world where that happened, there also might be it might have crippled esports a little bit, because in some way, if you look back at the history, right, it was Street Fighter 4, League of Legends, and StarCraft 2 that really paved the way for esports in a live streaming environment. And, Street Fighter 4 was very grassroots with all the other games around it, right? But StarCraft 2 was the one that partnered with groups to really start to step that production up. Like, let's start matching what OGN is doing and GOM is doing, and let's bring that to the Western world. And there's no doubt, I've been in the room when these conversations that happened, is that Riot was like, we need to do what they're doing and do it even better, right? So in some ways, StarCraft 2 really kicked off and like a spark that started a wildfire. And this credit is definitely deserved with other, Counter-Strike and all these other games. But in 2009 specifically, those were huge factors to the growth of esports. So had StarCraft released a little bit later, maybe Riot would have cared a little less about their esports, because they didn't necessarily have a competitor to compare what they could be doing to. And Street Fighter 4 would have then possibly blown up and everyone would have copied that and we'd be in a whole different world. But, I mean, we could go back and forth and probably speculate about which way it would have gone. But I look at it as that even though Blizzard may have started that year like kind of ahead of themselves, what they ended up kind of paving for the esports in a live streaming era was really quite amazing and impactful.
Yeah. No disagreement there. Unfortunately for us, StarCraft did say a lot of what not to do.
Right. Yeah.
Blizzard as a company has kind of been that a lot of, I mean, even Overwatch, it feels like Overwatch is like the Hitler of this podcast. You know, all the roads lead back to Overwatch. But that also is something that Blizzard was going to strive to accomplish and be the leader on. And then now, years later, people are like, oh, well, probably wasn't what you're supposed to do. Let's do it a different way, you know?
Yeah, there was danger in Riot being successful, right? Because suddenly it became essentially like a race. You know, like a space race, but in an esports race in a different way. Because if you look at the history, right, LCS kicks off, it takes a few seasons to really kind of fully develop. And I think in Blizzard's mind, bringing that all in-house and creating WCS, I think that maybe that had a pretty bad impact on like overall grassroots. And so, you know, I think there is a different alternate dimension where what does this space look like if all of the third-party TOs were still doing the circuits the way that they were doing it, that the WCS still existed, but it was like not as emphasized as, you know, it was during a period of time where it's like your WCS event or you're not. And that's kind of it. It worked for Riot and understandably so. But I think in some way, I felt like from a community perspective that we got something taken away from us in a way. And it's not totally true because like Home Story Cup and a lot of like, you know, smaller cups exist, but it definitely was a signal to some of the third-party TOs that had brought so many great tournaments and series and circuits to us that they weren't going to be able to do the same thing anymore. So, you know, I do think that if there was something that I felt was a bit flawed when it came to StarCraft 2 is I felt that, again, that was probably something that came a little bit too early. Like I wish that the sort of grassroots environment that had been created, supported by Blizzard, supported by all the TOs, that was just such a great time. And that bringing it in house, which ultimately probably led to the Overwatch League. Yeah. You know, that was probably, in my opinion, one of the I'm not going to say the worst thing to happen to the game, but I remember it hitting me pretty hard as a community member.
Yeah.
You know,
well, I think, again, at that time, there was kind of the idea of, well, if everything is coordinated by the same entity, then there might be like better pay and more organization and better scheduling and that type of thing, right? There was the benefits seen. But I do believe that hindsight does say that didn't work out. So then it was surprising when Overwatch was like gung-ho in-house. But now we have, even years later, we have Valorant kind of looking at it and being, Riot's Valorant, obviously, but still looking at it being like, what if we do kind of both, you know, a little bit?
Yes.
So
yes,
continued iterations, but again, kind of starting back with Blizzard being the first ones to try and put a, you know, a collar on this really weird esports beast that had grown perhaps unintentionally from StarCraft, but well, not unintentionally, they did design it as an esport, but anyways, you brought up one of the sad things, you know, a disappointing time in your vision of StarCraft. I'm also interested if you thought that the hold on here. I have two Korean related questions, and I'm conflating the both. If the region lock, there we go. If the region lock was ultimately a good idea, you were there from the beginning. You saw the Wild West that was everyone just come together, and then the Koreans picked up on kind of not exactly free money, but more money in the West as well. And they came in, and then we saw the dominance that was it, and you were there for all of that. So now looking back on it, those years, what does it look like? Was it a good thing to region lock? Was it bad?
Yeah, I don't think so. Again, this is all opinion at this point. I don't have statistical data to back up should have gone one way over the other. you know, when it comes to esports, one of the reasons why I think it is so special and so like unlike traditional sports is that it truly is a global phenomenon. Now, does technology prevent us sometimes from pitting the best players in different regions against one another? It no doubt does. But I think that the region lock was like overcorrection in that regard. You know, um, I don't know what the solution it was overall, but I do think that that introduced problems, you know, in terms of like what you mentioned, some players coming over, what region is this player in? How are they going to deal with that? This region is clearly much harder than this region. This region's easier, you know, all of the things. It's like, that's not the kind of conversation that you know you want to have, right? You came to an MLG, you came to an IM, you came to DreamHack. It's like if you were the best player there, you won. But now suddenly there's layers to it. There's complexity. Well, they did win, but like this region's easy, and over here, you know, God, this is like the whole region. It's the region of death. How can you even compare it? And you know, I always I don't know if that there's no right way to root for esports, but I felt like it compromised one of the things that made those live events so special. It's like, oh, you know, so-and-so came over, or so-and-so's going over, or we've got a collection of the best players in the building. And I think that it was needed for WCS the way they wanted to run. So to me, it's a part of like the whole package for WCS kind of missing the mark a little bit, I think, in terms of what it overall wanted to accomplish. You know, if it thought it was going to evolve StarCraft, it kind of did, just not necessarily in the ways that I would agree with. And I think like that was the time when people would argue over the dumbest shit, right? Like, again, like which region's the most strongest, or why this is BS, or, you know, the way that they played these games is mess. And like, no one likes that because, well, at least I don't. I think it actually creates more fractures in a community than anyone wants.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, this is your opinion, so you may have it freely. I'm not going to disagree. I definitely think it was a hard conversation to have, and I think it also, as you said, it was something that was necessary to talk about because of other things that had already gone wrong. So, you know, to say that this was the thing to do and always will be the thing to do is completely incorrect. There's a lot of caveats to it. But what I'm interested in from your perspective as a commentator is that there is no doubt that Korean versus foreigners, all right, Koreans versus non-Koreans was the talk of the town. It's what brought in all of that viewership. When you were still a commentator or a host, you were still working the StarCraft 2 life, were you concerned about those types of things? Did you start to already say like, oh, viewership's a little bit down, or this wasn't really what we were hoping for? Oh, God, I hope Huck gets to the finals because otherwise we're going to get like 10,000 people watching. Was there any of that, or is that going to be happening later in StarCraft's career?
I'm pretty happy to say that in most of the events that I participated in, I was far enough away from like needing to care about, are the numbers this or are they that? And at the end of the day, I just wanted good games. I didn't care if it was between two newbies that showed up and were playing for the first time, or two Koreans, or Korean, a European, or a European and someone from North America, right? Like, I think I just wanted, I wanted good games. You know what I got upset about? I'm just not the biggest fan of mirror matches, period. I don't know why. It's like, so for me, my biggest fear is like, are we going to have a mirror match? Are we going to, because I just always felt like, I'm a sucker for a TVZ all the time. So, but like we went through that period of time where it's like, oh God, like we have 8 Protoss in the quarterfinals. Like, we're all screwed. Like, I think that was more. Were there some, were there times where MLG was like, we didn't have as big of an international turnout and the viewership is not as good, or this is the finals and the viewership wavered a bit? Absolutely. I'm pretty sure that happened. But, as a commentator, I guess to me it is a lot less about the viewership and always like, are we getting the best we could possibly get from a competition perspective? So,
yeah, that's an interesting point. It's kind of a side note. I don't think we can really get into it, but that's what I was thinking of as to what I'm always talking with my chat about what makes like better spectating experiences, right? Because a lot of people come into StarCraft fans and like StarCraft 2 is the best viewing experience. And I go, yeah, I love the pacing of it, but there's reasons why this other esport, CS for instance, is like so well loved. And then one of the things that I recently thought about was like, it is so unfair. In StarCraft, you get finals between 2 races. So regardless, someone is out of the picture, and they take it very seriously. They might actually stop watching if there's no Protoss in the finals because they're right. Protoss. And that just doesn't exist in a lot of the other esports, like even fighting games. I don't think there's that much attachment to the character that you usually play. That if, Fox isn't in the finals, you're not going to watch it. So that's really a difficult part. But this reminded me of a conversation I was having with Sir Scoots, and he was like, the storyline is the bomb in CSGO. And then I was like, yeah, that's a very good point. You can kind of boil things down. How is the narrative created for StarCraft events? And he kind of, was like, yeah, it's a real hard question because it's like, it's a hard game to pinpoint. But you being an excellent commentator, talking about story all the time, what was it for you? What did you still boil all the StarCraft games down to make people feel excited, even when their race wasn't in it, when their player wasn't in it, when their country wasn't in it, or when the games were actually maybe a little imbalanced?
I think that it always had to do with like pulling back further and further, right? That somewhere there always is a story to tell. It might not be in this exact game. Maybe the story to tell in this moment is the fact that if this person wins, it sets up this match. And so that's the story that you kind of elaborate on. So I do think that, I believe that Scoots is absolutely right. StarCraft can have like a moving target in regards to what the story is and, how you tell that story. Sometimes it came down to joking about it, right? Like, I mean, there actually were situations where it was a 4-player semifinal between 4 Protosses, and you're like, strap in. If you don't like Protoss, this might not be the funnest next 3 hours or whatever. So I do think that, right, from a caster perspective, really tried to always bring like the entertainment back to it. But I think for me personally, how I would deal with that is, what does this mean for the larger picture, right? Is there a scenario where it's like this person could upset this one? Might we see a rematch if this person wins, right? So I think sometimes you had to pull yourself out of the game you're in, because you're not going to fool anyone if like someone's got a clear lead. Like, it's not going to be like, oh, he accidentally just GG'd and left the game. What an unexpected surprise. So I do think that StarCraft overall has a more difficult time following the ball in that regard. And that's actually one of the reasons why like some of the weekly NASL and even WCS kind of fell short, because if you weren't telling the story about the game you were watching, but that was like the only game that was happening that night, what are you talking about, right? And then I think that's where people started losing some, a little bit of interest overall. Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the funnest things that I recall, like kind of before the WCS era, is obviously all the live events were fun, but we did the EG Masters Cup, which was right like a more Korean team kill type scenario. Here's some one-on-ones, here's some 2v2s, right? Mixing it up, get a little silly. But again, that was another situation where it's like, if this game sucks in game 2, that's okay, because we've got these other 3 games we can speculate and talk about the story and what that means, etc. So I do think that a lot of times you had to pull out. But to your point, it does happen in other games. I remember there was an era of Street Fighter 4 where like people just hated Rufus. Rufus was winning every tournament. And so if Rufus was in the finals, especially like a mere Rufus, people would be like, peace, I'm out. I really do not care. I don't want to see it right there. This also did happen in some regards in CSGO early on. Ninjas in Pajamas had like a 70+ event win, and people kind of got sick of it. We've seen it happen in Quake when Rafa from Team Liquid like kept winning tournament after tournament. And you know when it got exciting is when someone finally beat Rafa, and then it's like boom. But now the story that we've kind of been building on, like, can it happen? Can it happen? Can it? Boom! It finally happens, and we got plenty of that in StarCraft 2. I think. I mean, there was a whole era of like, who's gonna possibly beat the Koreans? Like, it's gonna be impossible. Well, clearly we're in an era where it can happen, right? So, you know, I do think that the future of RTS though probably has some evolution to do in that regard. If you look and use every game that you kind of mentioned, right? Whether it's Counter-Strike, clear objective, League of Legends, Dota, clear objectives, right? It's a similar problem that like why no battle royale has really blown up in the esports scene, because it's like, how the fuck do we tell this story? It's like, do you just have one game and then that's it, you win it and you're done? But then of course the community's like, no, that is so lame. Like, you can't determine a winner based off of one game. I mean, Fortnite couldn't figure out what to do with their championships. It's like, just have them keep playing over and over. So it's not unique, but I do think that it prompts the need to reevaluate while keeping the integrity of what makes StarCraft great about StarCraft, right? What evolutions can it make in order to be a bit more spectator friendly but keeping the high level of competition, keeping the players ceiling, you know, skill ceiling and that being limitless, right? Not an easy task to do. Certainly not the one that's going to do it, but I think like has gotten to a point now where that will make or break an esport for sure.
Right. I mean, I didn't know about the Street Fighter thing. So that was actually really cool to learn about. It does still suck though, because even when we have, you know, Cyril winning all 4 of the WCSs back a few years ago, you know, the question was a really cool question, like who could dethrone the king, and some people were getting really tired with Cyril winning. But I think the fact that, you know, the race issue, which sounds really weird, but yeah, the race issue is, it feels detached, right? It feels like if a player is winning a lot, well, then anyone else could do the same thing. That player is not given any natural advantages. But when a race wins, that's like, you know, that was the natural advantage. You picked the race. So I think that's what really sucks in comparison to some of those esports. Because CSGO, I mean, it's like you're both terrorists and counter-terrorists.
Right. I definitely think that like the Street Fighter one is more parallel to that in terms of in terms of it kind of being, this is where character selection would get people to disengage. And yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, again, I think we all inherently, as players, as fans, as spectators, like, what's your favorite matchup to watch?
Oh, Terran versus Zerg.
Right. So, I mean, I'll tell you, I probably didn't like playing Terran versus Zerg as much, but I would watch it literally all day. Give me a Terran versus Zerg tournament, I'll do it. Like, I played Zerg. Cannot stand watching ZVZs, do not enjoy playing ZVD. So everyone comes in with their own kind of bias in that regard. And it is pretty unique to StarCraft. Like, on one hand, I think that makes it, you know, something special, but on the other hand, yeah, that might be a problem that needs to be solved in some way in the future. And yeah, I don't know how that'll happen, but
neither do I. Imagine if it was 4 races, right? Like, it's even worse. It's actually a legitimate question. Absolutely. It will always be a point against StarCraft. It will be a point for StarCraft. I mean, this goes way deep too, and we've talked to RTS developers about it, but it was just one of those things I was thinking of, which, like, dang, there's like the ease of viewership that some other esports have. But my last direct question, because I'm going to ask you some vague questions afterwards, but my last direct question is, speaking of these like these boring times or when the matchup isn't really according to the viewership's wants and needs, at what point did you start was there ever a point where you acknowledged that comedy was really necessary? Where you went from like, it's, kind of fun, but I'm not going to force it, to, yeah, this is a really boring match. Let's try and really have fun. Let's like really joke around. Was there ever that period of time? Or was it natural because you guys already had such great comedians in the casting circuit?
I feel like I have a 3-part answer to this one. So first and foremost, I have to give so much credit to both Plot brothers for this. I think Tasteless early on showed me, I always I always took the stance of like, listen, gaming is fun. So you better believe it that I'm going to have fun when I'm commentating. Like if you go back and listen to even my old Quake 3 casts and, the late 90s, early 2000s, that was, it needed to be entertaining, but also just because like it mirrored the community in a way, right? And people enjoyed it. And there's tactile feedback watching IRC and people laughing that, at a joke you made. And to me, I was like, hey, we have the ability to make esports whatever we want. Like, there's no reason why we need to be like, welcome to ESPN. It's now time for the next StarCraft 2 championship. Like we don't have to do that. Right. And in some ways we have the freedom to kind of, to kind of do it. So I always feel like early on in casting, comedy was, something to lean on because it's what made esports unique. I think it was Nick who showed me, in that like 2006, 2007 era that like, you might be able to take it even one step further than you're, than you'd want to. And I trust me, I had a lot of fun with Nick and Dan over the years, and for exactly because of sort of Nick's approach and attitude and comedic timing and setups and overall. I think that then I was very fortunate to be able to cast with, with Sean, who I think I had a very natural chemistry with. I feel like was able to set him up for jokes and things like that, and had some like natural game things happen that just sort of brought it. But I actually love the balance that Sean always brought, which is like, we can be goofy, but also like, I'm going to want to get really serious sometimes. Like, great. Like, this is awesome. Like, that's passion. Let's go. But then there was like a whole new element. This is part 3, the whole new element that was introduced. And I know you can relate, because I know, Jess, you've had some of those days where you've just been like casting all day. 10 hours have gone by, maybe 11, maybe 12. And you're just kind of like, your brain is just kind of like, bucket, like goofy mode initiated. Let's go. And some of the most memorable broadcasts, both for me and I think that, people often refer to, are those late night, like last games of the day. The banter in between games is just hilarious. It kind of seems like it's not that people didn't care. It's just people are like so ready to go home that just everything was kind of unraveling. Oh, I have a soft spot in my heart for when you hit that point of the day, because the day's almost over, but also it's just so much fun. I think everyone kind of knows, like, yeah, it's been a long day. Like, just kind of let it go and let it out. But I hope that comedy and the lightheartedness and frankly, just the fun of gaming continues to exist in the world of esports. And right now, I don't see any reason why that's going anywhere. I mean, there's certainly some games that kind of choose to be a little bit more on the let's be ultra professional side. And while other games will obviously still lean a little bit more towards the entertainment comedy side. But I think, right, it's probably a balance that you're always trying to master and achieve, as long as some version of that fun comedy entertainment stays in esports. I'll be very happy, because I do think at the end of the day, right, like pros might be playing us at the top level and it is super serious, but like we play these games because we love them, because we're having fun, because we enjoy the experiences and the memories that we make with friends and family, etc. So why not keep that as a part of esports. So that's kind of where I sit.
Yeah, I felt often dwarfed by the comedy of the Plot brothers and Nick and Dan together as well. Obviously, I was just if I matched In Control's level of comedy, I felt like I was like over the moon.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I never assumed to beat him. I would never try. But if I matched it, then I was really happy. So that's one of our most famous like clips together. Is I knew he was going to throw me this joke, and I reacted well enough that everyone loved it, and I was like, freaking nailed it. I was an In Control's level for one hot second. But yeah, that was it was a kind of one of those eye-opening things where it did, after he passed, it was kind of like there was a little bit of that comedy missing. From
1,000%.
No one ever is going to reach that level, unfortunately. But I always think of it, as the can I add a little bit here? Can I be a little bit of Jeff here? And try not to go too overboard, because I wield comedy just kind of all over the place, and I hit people all the time. So trying to contain it like he did is definitely a goal of mine. But anyways, so kind of on it's the same point though. Like, what is the moment that you remember where you just like couldn't stop laughing? Like the funniest moment? Because I know there's also a lot of things that happen, like in the green room, for instance. And I'm wondering if there's any PG stories to tell.
Yeah, PG is the important part. Oh my gosh. I mean, I think everyone knows that's a StarCraft fan that's ever watched Sean, but he has a super infectious laugh.
Yeah.
And I can't even remember what event it was at. It was definitely, during an event, there's some delays, and of course everyone knows that it's like, just fill some time, it'll be all good. And during one of these times, I think it was a situation of some joking was happening in the green room, and that was brought back up in a live capacity. So there was this moment where then Sean started laughing about it, and then I was laughing, and no one really had any idea like what was going on. And I just like, it was some kind of silly, moments like that I think were just, one thing that is so hard is that I didn't ever not have fun when I was doing Like, I always feel like when it came down to all the different casting groups I've had a chance to work with, all amazing in their own rights, there was always something like I just knew I was about to walk into a weekend of magic when I got a chance to really, to cast with some of the greats in StarCraft 2. And it was like an honor and a pleasure every single time. Like, I don't ever think it made a game boring. I don't ever think it made an event feel long. So, I mean, sorry. Oh man. I feel like the statute of limitations is probably over on this one, but dude, there's a story. I think it was MLG Rally, and it involves some brownies that a player brought to. You heard this one? Stop me if you've heard this one. No. I'm going all in, Jess. All right, listen. So a fan brought Pain User a bunch of brownies, right? Of course, Pain User's like, this fan brought me brownies. I'm like, hey, just doing my diligence and PSA, like, do you trust this person, Pain User? Like, do you know who this person is? Because they could be poisonous. It's like, no, man, they're definitely THC brownies. And it's like, okay, so, Pain User, a great guy. He's a sharer. So he handed out some brownies. Three recipients of those brownies were tasteless, Artosis, and Noni. And let's just say, Jess, like, these brownies were edibles for giants. as in
Oh.
they were so potent that this is not the first edible that a person should ever eat. Like, you're gonna have a bad time. And those 3 guys had a pretty bad time. And I actually hate myself right now because I'm laughing at their misfortune. But I think even now they got to be laughing about it. It was about the funniest thing I've ever seen, because like, these brownies were super powerful. And let's just say that those 3 didn't have much experience in that realm. So
No.
I've never laughed harder. It still brings a smile on my face. Gentlemen, I love you so much. I hope you don't hate me for that. But it's, this was like a part of the magic that existed as I got to experience all these things in game, out of game. Like, I've never, ever heard another story of like a fan bringing a player, brownies and whatnot. So the whole thing was just a comedy of errors and hilarity. But I remember actually being with Sir Scoots, and we went over to like a hotel room and walked in. And it's like, what's going on with the guys? Like, is everything okay? Is there anything that we could do? And Pain User had to explain it all to us. And we were just like, oh no. But needless to say, I think they both missed their flights the next day. So,
Gotcha.
Sorry about that, boys.
Yeah. Was this 2011 rally?
It must have been, yeah.
That was one where like WCS was on the side and like Scarlet Vibe was in the finals of that one. Just like that's the only thing I know differentiates it between that and 2010, I think. Or 2012 actually. Maybe it was 2012. The point is, like, you brought this up and I was like, oh god, because I remember actually I think it was 2012. That's when that Leanock won. So if that's the one,
that might have been it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, 2012. I went to that one. That was my first event. I had like convinced my parents that we'd all drive down together and see it. And then I was going with a bunch of my friends that I made in the community that were also big Brood War elitists. So that's how I got into that. But I remember it was like a humongous meeting room that someone had rented out in the hotel. So we had like a 40-man Mafia game because Mafia was the biggest thing in StarCraft communities back in that day. And so it was like we eventually like got 2 rooms and like, divvied it up. But I remember one of my friends came in and he just sat down and he had a pie on his lap and he just like started eating it with a fork. And we were like, what's up with you? Like, what happened? And he was like, I'm just like really hungry, dude. And then we found out later that he had been a part of a group of people that like had wheat brownies.
It was probably a Pain User fan brownie. Oh my gosh, God. Full circle. Look at that.
Jeez,
look at that. Unbelievable.
Oh, that was crazy. That was so funny. Yeah, because I think actually Pain User might have even joined in on the Mafia at some point. But geez Louise, that is a good time. I mean, I always wonder, like as you said, like the statute of limitations, is it up for some of these things? But I mean, some of these things are so hard to explain. Like the reason that they're so hysterical. Like I've tried explaining. Like Nate was getting a hair, not his haircut. He was getting the makeup and hair done, and he had a little bit of a stash. And then Rosa like swiped his hair to like the left, and he looked like Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man 3. but then but then with like kind of like a stash. So in Control just like looked up from his phone and he kind of like smiled to himself and he was like, "You look like Edgar Allan Hitler." And then he like went back to watching on his phone. And we just could not stop laughing. And so if it got brought up on the broadcast, we would just like be holding our mouths.
Exactly. So you've been there too, where sometimes the behind the scenes would seep into, right? And there's a Reddit thread. Does anyone get this joke? Oh, this is the lore behind it, etc.
Yeah.
It really was. I mean, Jazz, it's like what people see in that world is a lot of, that's exactly what everyone got behind the scenes, there was just always a lot of authenticity and genuine people, and still are, obviously, in StarCraft. One of the reasons why it's one of my favorite, types of events to cast and groups to cast with, etc. Like I said, something magical, something special about it. Yeah.
So you cast the Haloofs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you cast the GG.
Yeah.
1v1. Which was the funnier moment in your soldier brain?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's like on I think when I look at the reaction overall, the MMA Idra game was funny because literally Sean and I were just speechless. And that you're talking about two guys that have zero issue filling air, and we were just like, do we need to check on someone? Like, see it right? I think so. I look back on that and I think it's hilarious. I actually think the hallucination was heartbreaking in a lot of ways, because it was just like, how it went down, and then how Huck approached it in the next game. Like, that those were hallucinations and Idra wasn't having it. And that was like a full tilt moment. Like, it's kind of rare when you're sitting on the caster desk and because like things happen in esports. Like, yeah, you feel bad for some players. Like, sometimes things happen, but it's like, it's a tournament. Like, it is a game. These things happen. But I was like, oh my gosh, like my heart breaks for Idra here a little bit. And on the flip side, I'm like, Huck, you goddamn genius. Like, only you would be able to pull this off. And I think Huck was always trying to, bring his personality into the game and make that a part of the whole package. And he did it right there. Right. So I think the reaction to MMA Idra was definitely the funniest. Again, like, you're not going to find another moment where Sean and I are like speechless the way that we were. The hallucinations, looking back on it, it's kind of amazing. But I remember at the time just being like, oh my gosh, like like when you watch like a skateboard video and someone falls and you're just like, oh, and you kind of cringe a little bit, like, I bet that hurt a lot. Like, that was the physical manifestation of feeling that GG because of some hallucinated void rays. It was really bad.
It's amazing. I don't think I've ever heard that perspective. I think at the time I was a Zerg fan and an Idra fan, so I was just like crushed. I was like visibly crushed, because I also figured he was going to lose the series afterwards, which I'm pretty sure he did, because he got tilted. But yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I know you weren't the only ones that were speechless. I mean, literally, I remember a clip of that, and then they panned to the crowd, and the crowd is also like,
yeah, what? Yeah, exactly. They were people with their hands on their heads and like, what's going on? Was this a mistake? Did he actually win? Like,
yeah.
The whole game was just, it was like set up to, I mean, you'd almost think it was scripted, with MMA killing his command center and then like the fight. And we were just like, oh my gosh, yeah, Idra won this one. Like, great. And then just the GG. And it was like,
it was, yeah. I don't think I've ever seen such a punchy moment, There's so many good moments in that game. Yeah, that's the question I'll ask you today. Thank you very much for coming back on, sharing some of your experiences with StarCraft and some of the perception as well, since we've been able to witness the rise and fall. Even though it's not dead, I'm not saying that, guys, but it definitely was. It was the top of the world in 2011, 2012, and it's definitely been beat out by other esports at this point. But it's great looking back on it. I really wish that there was a comprehensive history of esports. I feel like we're going to get historians in the future.
Yes, that would be nice. I totally agree with you. I think each individual game could have its own little encyclopedia. The esports as a whole, because they're also so intertwined, regardless of how separate we think they are, right? How many, like, if you think about, I know that it's tough when you see all of these other esports that have just excelled, that have grown. Dota's given away millions of dollars, and like it might feel a little bit like StarCraft didn't make it, but you still can't forget about the legacy that this game has, right? And in the same way that other Blizzard games have, right, brought an audience back to its core, like I don't think anyone should feel like StarCraft won't, find its spot again, right? It is an incredible game. in a world where maybe like games and mechanics have changed, but it has a legacy. It has a fan base that won't ever forget about it, that will continue to grow. It'll have its time again. Maybe that's StarCraft 3. Maybe it's StarCraft 5. Maybe it's a whole different RTS, right? But I think that the spirit of StarCraft will always live in some way, shape, or form. And so don't give up hope yet, everyone. StarCraft had an enormous impact on live streaming, on other esports that are successful today. A lot of that has to do with the undying passion of fans. And so just keep loving what you love. And I believe it'll happen.
Yeah, I would really hope so. Yeah. No one knows what the future will hold, though. So
you're right.
Yeah, we're gonna figure it out together. We got CEO making some cryptic tweets. We got Frost Giant about to show us, that they have some stuff brewing.
Yep.
No NDA breaking here, but stuff's a brewing. And even Dreamhaven, in the future. So it's kind of cool in that perspective. We have so many of the people that I think we really liked and knew were good people and passionate people about like RTS that are still very much involved in video game creation. Just not necessarily at Blizzard nowadays, which is the sad thing.
Yeah. That is true. It may not be in the form of StarCraft, but like I said, I think like the spirit of that game is still there. It's why I can't like watch League of Legends without thinking about original Dota. It's just no matter what, like that will not be a separation I'll ever make. So everything inspires everything else in some way, shape, or form. And so, StarCraft will always live.
It's a beautiful part to end on, I think. So thank you again, DJWheat.
Thank you
for coming on. Are you still doing the looking over all the old VODs in the morning?
I am. We're a couple behind. It's actually really interesting that one of the things we talked about was the whole StarCraft 2. How are people feeling about it? Because we've gotten to the point now. We're like episode 15 or 16, and that conversation is starting to spin up more and more. It's been really interesting. We got through kind of like the early time. There's a few mentions of like, oh, the beta is going to come out. I think we're about to hit the BlizzCon where we get to see a little bit more. And then, I will, if anything funny from like that old time, right? Like you got to listen to this argument. I'll make sure that I ping you on it because, even some of the initial conversations have been a little funny, especially like Slasher gets in on them. But you can kind of see where it's going. Like, is this a baby's game? Are people going to hate it? Will the Korean scene embrace it? So I'll let you know because we're getting to kind of some of the juicy stuff.
That would be amazing. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome.
It's happening in your stream. So check it out, guys. And thank you for watching as always. Actually, this went so much faster than I even expected. So it's still one of the longer episodes, but had a blast. So I need to get my outro prepared. But yeah, thank you to everyone who listens and watches on YouTube. Patreon's patreon.com/ZombieGrub. Thank you to Shayne for co-producing this podcast and Barrett for also helping to organize and produce. And thank you to all the Patreons in the $10 tier and above, I believe. Nick, Vinny, Steven, E.T., Ravi, and CuddleBunny for your continued support. I hope to see you back here for episode 53. Bye, guys.